Have you ever wondered if the story you know about the creation of Eve truly reflects the whole truth? Leave us your comment and tell us if you've ever felt that something didn't quite fit. Have you sensed that there are hidden details, that the pieces of the traditional narrative seem too neat, too simplified? Today we're going to dive into a mystery that challenges centuries of interpretation. A mystery that could forever change the way you understand the scriptures, your faith, and the spiritual identity of women in the sacred narrative. Do you believe Eve was literally created from a rib? Or could there be something deeper, more symbolic, more powerful behind those words? We want to hear your spiritual reflection. Write in the comments how you understand Eve's purpose in the divine plan. From a young age, we've been taught an almost childish version of the creation. A God who puts Adam to sleep, takes one of his ribs, and forms Eve from it. The end. We close the book, move on to the serpent and the forbidden fruit. But what if I told you that this story, as it was told to us, is merely a shadow of a much greater mystery? What if Eve's creation wasn't a surgical act, but a sacred separation? What if the original Hebrew text reveals a dimension we've ignored for centuries? This is one of those stories where words matter, where a single letter in Hebrew can completely change the spiritual meaning of an entire chapter, where the hidden tradition doesn't contradict faith, but illuminates it with a deeper light. Let's start with the foundational text, Genesis 2:21-22. In our common translations we read, "And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he took one of his ribs, and closed up the flesh in its place. And from the rib that the Lord God took from the man he made a woman." But here's where the intrigue begins. In Hebrew, the word commonly translated as rib is tselah, tsela. This word appears over 40 times in the Old Testament, and curiously, in almost none of them does it refer to a literal rib. It's used to describe the sides of the tabernacle, the flanks of a structure, or even an entire section of a sacred object. What if tsela doesn't mean rib, but side? What if what God separated wasn't a bone, but an essential part of Adam, an entire side of his being? This idea isn't new. As early as the 4th century, the Greek theologian Gregory of Nyssa suggested that God didn't create Eve from a literal rib, but divided the first androgynous human, a complete being containing both masculine and feminine, into two complementary entities. A divine unity fractured to reveal love, reciprocity, and purpose. The Midrash Rabbah, a collection of ancient rabbinic teachings, also explores this possibility. It states that God created Adam double, with two faces, one masculine and one feminine, and then separated them. It wasn't just a surgical sleep, it was a spiritual ceremony of individualization. Adam didn't lose something. He was completed by the appearance of his reflection. And here's where the biblical account begins to transform from a simple story into a profound spiritual parable. Eve's creation isn't a story of subordination, as many have taught, but a revelation of unity, purpose, and sacred difference. It's not about the woman coming from the man and therefore being less. It's about both coming from the one. Eve is the other side of the human soul, a reflection of divine intention. Isn't it striking that in Hebrew the name Adam isn't just a proper name, but comes from Adamah, meaning earth, and that Eve, Javah, Havah, is related to the Hebrew root chaya, meaning life? Eve isn't an extension of Adam. She is the threshold through which life enters human history. She represents the awakening, the sensitivity, the intuition, the life that pulses before the word is spoken. What if the true purpose of the Genesis account isn't to teach us ancient biology, but spiritual wisdom? What if every word is encoded like a sacred seed, waiting to be understood by hearts seeking more? Consider the detail of the deep sleep that fell upon Adam. The Hebrew word used there is tardemah, a rare word that appears in moments of great spiritual revelation. It's not just sleep. It's a state of trance, of prophetic separation, as if God were performing a divine operation to open a portal between the visible and the invisible. The same word appears in Genesis 15:12 when God makes a covenant with Abraham. Whenever Tadema appears, something is being revealed, not merely taken. Doesn't it seem odd that God would need to put someone to sleep to remove a bone? Or could it be that the sleep was necessary to unveil a mystery that can only be understood in the silence of the soul? In this trance, God doesn't simply extract, he builds. The verb used for making the woman is bana, which literally means to build, to construct, like raising a temple. God doesn't create Eve as he created Adam from the dust, bara or yatsar. He builds her like a sanctuary with intention, detail, and purpose. Why would the sacred author choose this architectural verb to describe the creation of the woman? Could it be because she represents something more complex, more refined, more structurally sacred within the narrative of creation? Perhaps this is why the Zohar, a central work of Jewish mysticism, teaches that Eve wasn't a lesser helper, but an expression of the Shekinah, the divine presence manifested in the world. According to the Kabbalists, the separation of Adam and Eve was also a separation of the masculine and feminine aspects of divinity, which need to reunite in harmony for creation to be complete. Eve isn't an appendage. She is a revelation. And so, when Eve awakens from this divine construction, the world changes. Adam doesn't just say, "This is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bones." He recognizes her. He beholds her as someone who reveals something about God that he hadn't yet understood. It's in this moment that the human is no longer alone, not because he lacked company, but because he lacked a mirror. He lacked the gaze of the other that reveals who we truly are. And in that gaze, the mystery of love, reciprocity, and shared purpose is born. Eve is the first revelation of the principle of otherness, the recognition of the other as a bearer of the same sacred dignity. And all this is hidden in the nuances of the Hebrew, as if God left breadcrumbs of gold for those brave enough to seek them. Returning to the Hebrew term selah, we find even more depth. Some scholars suggest that this term might refer not just to a physical side, but to an ontological spiritual division. As if Adam were initially a complete being in duality, containing both masculine and feminine, and the separation was the revelation of these two aspects so that, separated, they could choose to love. Isn't that what true love demands? Freedom, choice, individuality that gives itself? Eve wasn't created to fill a void in Adam, but so that, in seeing each other, they could discover together the beauty of interdependence. The masculine and feminine as two pillars of the same temple, two parts of the same eternal melody. In the writings of Origen, a 3rd century Christian theologian, we find echoes of this idea. For him, Eve symbolizes more than the woman. She represents the human soul, which, separated from its source, longs to return to its creator. From this perspective, Eve's creation ceases to be an anatomical event and becomes an existential metaphor. What God did in that garden wasn't just giving Adam a partner, but planting in the world the symbol of the search for unity, for fullness, for reconnection with the divine. And it's at this point that many ancient traditions begin to sound like witnesses to the same mystery. The Talmud, for instance, debates at length whether the first woman was truly Eve. Some ancient rabbis suggest that before Eve, there was a woman named Lilith, a figure shrouded in mystery and rejection. According to these texts, Lilith was created from the same dust as Adam, but refused to submit. She fled, becoming a wandering spirit, and so God, to avoid conflict, built Eve differently, from within the man, from his side, as a part of him, so there would be harmony. We're not saying here that Lilith should be accepted as doctrinal truth, but rather pointing out that, since ancient times, there was unease, an intuition that there was more to this story than meets the eye. And what if this entire construction points to something even greater? What if Eve is in fact a living prophecy? In Ephesians 5:31-32, Paul speaks of marriage as a great mystery that points to Christ and the church. If Eve came from Adam's side, and the church is presented as the bride that comes from Christ's side, then what happened on the cross, when Jesus' side was pierced and blood and water flowed out, is the spiritual echo of what happened in Eden. The opened side of the first Adam gave rise to an earthly woman. The opened side of the second Adam gave rise to an eternal bride. Eve is thus archetype and prophecy, shadow and promise. Her creation is the foreshadowing of the church born from sacrifice. This perspective radically elevates Eve's figure. She isn't the culprit of the fall, as traditional theology has so often insisted. She is the beginning of the search, the first to desire knowledge, the first to dialogue, the first to dare. And perhaps in her boldness lies the beginning of redemption, because you cannot redeem what was never lost, and you cannot learn without touching the fruit of experience. When we understand this, the garden ceases to be a stage of disobedience and becomes a mirror of the human soul. And Eve, far from being merely Adam's companion, becomes a symbol of the awakened soul, of feminine consciousness, of the spiritual presence that perceives, questions, and desires more than the inertia of blind obedience. Eve didn't fall. She walked. She dared. And because of that, today we have history, consciousness, pain, and redemption. Because it was in that walk that the promise was made. In Genesis 3:15, still in the same chapter of the fall, God announces that from the seed of the woman would come the one who would crush the serpent's head, not from the man's seed, but from the woman's. Eve carries from the beginning the seed of victory. She is the fertile ground where hope was planted. But there's one more striking detail. The name Adam gives the woman after the fall. Before, he simply calls her woman, because she was taken from the man. But after the fall, in Genesis 3:20, he names her Eve, Javah, because she would be the mother of all the living. In Hebrew, Javah derives from the root chaya, meaning to live. It's as if, even after the mistake, even after the pain, Adam recognizes in her not the cause of death, but the source of life. The name is a redemption. It's a prophecy. It's a spiritual declaration. Life continues through her, by her, with her. And today, centuries later, as we reopen this ancient text with fresh eyes, with an open heart and a thirst for revelation, we realize that Eve's story isn't just about the past. It's about us, about how we see ourselves, about how we value the feminine, about how we seek the lost unity. Eve was taken from Adam's side, yes, but to stand beside him, never beneath him. She was built as a temple, as a sign, as a mirror. Her hidden origin doesn't diminish her glory. On the contrary, it reveals her as an essential part of the divine plan, as a symbol of something that needs to be restored, not in a distant garden, but within each of us. And so, as we face Eve's origin, with eyes that search not only the letters of the text, but the spaces between them, the silences, the echoes, the metaphors, we realize there's a divine intention far deeper than simply forming a companion for Adam. We see that what was being built there was a theology of the mirror, of completeness, and of the love that emerges from separation. Eve isn't an accessory. Eve is mystery. Eve is sacred architecture. Eve is the womb of revelation. In her Hebrew origin, in her name, in her verb, in her side, everything about Eve points to a spiritual code, a secret not revealed to the hasty, a treasure buried beneath layers of translations and traditions, waiting for those who dare to ask, could there be more? And there is. There is so much more, because at the same time that God separates her from Adam, he also points to humanity's mission, to seek that unity again, not through fusion but through communion, not through domination but through mutual recognition. Eve, built, formed, constructed, not just as a body, but as a symbol. She is, at once, sanctuary and priestess. She represents the sensitive side, the contemplative gaze, the wisdom that doesn't impose with force but penetrates with depth. The woman God builds is the one who carries within her the gift of giving life, of sustaining the invisible, of intuiting God's presence where chaos still seems to reign. And if Eve is a reflection of the divine side of humanity, then her fall isn't final ruin, but a portal of transformation. The Christian tradition, when viewed with this spiritual lens, doesn't condemn her but exalts her, because it was through her that redemption was prophesied, because it was from the woman, not the man, that the one who would crush the serpent came. And that's more than a detail. It's a seal, a reminder that God doesn't abandon those who err, those who dare, or those who desire more. He redeems, He renames, He rebuilds, He transforms pain into promise, and He makes weakness a path to glory. In the end, Eve challenges us. She invites us to look beyond simplified stories, to distrust easy translations, to dive deep into the mysteries of the Word, because she is more than a character in Genesis. She is a mirror, an enigma, a revelation in the form of a woman. And by understanding her true origin, not as a rib, but as a side, as a temple, as a prophecy, we are invited to rethink everything we thought we knew about identity, about gender, about the divine plan. We are taken back to the garden, not to relive the fall, but to recognize the beginning of the journey, a journey that still unfolds today in every human soul, because each of us carries within us a search for reunion. And perhaps, just perhaps, it's in this reunion with the truth about Eve that we can finally rediscover the truth about ourselves. What do you think about this mystery? Had you ever imagined that Eve's creation hid so many layers of spiritual meaning? We want to know your reflection. Leave your comment below and share with us how this revelation has impacted your faith. If this video has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with someone else who's seeking deep answers in the Word. Because perhaps by unearthing these hidden treasures, we are closer to understanding the true face of God, reflected surprisingly in the side of a woman.